Joshua chapter 3, and we're down to the Jordan crossing. God's given instructions for the priest. The priests are to take up the ark and go before the nation of Israel. And when their feet hit the water, they're to stand still. And then there's going to be a miracle take place. And its crossing is organized so that instead of the ark being in the middle of the procession, now the ark is in front, and all the other tribes have come close enough to watch what happens. Right? So we've left them there at the edge. Verse 13, the instructions are given here. First, in verse 12, I'm going to remind you of that. It says, "Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand." And how's that? What's a heap? Big pile, right? A big thing. A heap is like you go to the trash dump. It used to be you go to the landfill, right? You see that trash just piled up like that, all right? That's kind of the idea, the general idea. It's piled up instead of being like the Red Sea. Remember, the Red Sea was kind of still, wasn't it? So God made a wall in between there and dried it out with a wind. And we're going to be looking at the comparisons between the two. But here now, see that the waters from Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon an heap. And it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as they that bear the ark were come unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest. Now I want you to see, you get a lot of history here. You get a lot of detail, that they're not just crossing a river like you would normally cross a river, right? Remember, there's like 1 million people with animals, livestock, children, women, old folks. Everybody's with them now, all right? They got across the Red Sea. Remember, they got across the Red Sea by God parting the waters and then blowing the wind overnight and drying out the dirt or mud or whatever you want to call it there at the bottom, and they went across on dry ground. Now here we see a distinct difference, and here we see that the water stood on a heap, and it said the Jordan overflowed all its banks all the time of the harvest. So the waters are in flood stage, which means what? It's a river, it's a current, and it's in flood stage. And we know what flood stage is around here, don't we? We've seen flood stages around here, especially when it come down Big Cove. That flash flood, remember that? It came down about, 10 years ago or so, somewhere around there. How it exceeded and went over its banks and started wiping out everything in its path, right? So this is kind of what the Jordan does. It says every harvest time it overflows its banks. So they're getting up there. The priests are told to step into the water. And remember, these priests are acting in faith, because you step in the water with a big heavy box, what's likely to happen? You're going to get carried off. Fortunately, remember, this big heavy gold box here, not just a box, it's God's testimony. God's covenant is there in that box. And remember, this is the mercy seat. These two angels are solid gold. All this is coated in gold. Even the poles are coated in gold. So it's got to be very heavy. All right? And now they have to carry that into water. So you say, oh man, how are they going to do that? Well, the priests have to be in faith as well. They have to trust in God. Joshua's told them what to do. When your feet hit the water, you stop. All right? So they stopped, and it said, verse 16, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up on a heap very far from the city Adam, that is beside Zaratan, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. All right, get that? So he's made a wall here on this one side, not on two sides, on one side. And the river below has dried up now, all the way down to the salt sea, it says. And here now they're going across. Now, remember, we're going to look at that in just a second, but remember the Red Sea crossing, God did it at night. He blowed everything dry. Here, he's doing it different. You'll see that difference because they don't have to wait for the wind to blow and dry it out, do they? As soon as the feet of the priests hit that water, boom, stands on heat, the water's cut off from down below, they walk across on dry ground. It said, and the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, look at this, stood firm on what? Dry ground where? Isn't that something to think about? Here's in flood stage, and now God's performing another miracle. This miracle of the crossing of Jordan in flood stage, and they're going to cross like they did at the Red Sea on dry ground. Now, God didn't wait and blow it dry overnight. Like I said, there's a difference here. Here, God didn't use the same miracle. He changed it. Okay? He changed it. All right? And all the Israelites passed over how? On dry ground. Until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. So everybody made the cross, didn't they? All right? So now we want to look at the differences and the similarities between the Red Sea crossing and the Jordan crossing. All right? First, at the sea, the Red Sea, it terminated Israel's bondage. Remember that? They were fleeing from the Pharaoh. They were fleeing into supposedly unto the promised land. However, when they got to the edge of that, what did them boys do? They got scared, didn't they? They got afraid. They began to doubt. They had little faith. They didn't believe God was able to defeat the giants and all them strong nations that were living in that place. So they got scared and said, oh, we can't go in there. And then Moses says, okay, God says you're not going in there. You're going back out into the desert for 40 years. So the sea terminated Israel's bondage, but the river crossing initiated their entrance into the land of promise. All right? This was the first step into the land of promise that had been promised to Abraham back 400 plus years ago. It was Abraham's, given to Abraham, it's promised to the children of Israel to occupy it, and now here they go, across the river. Second, the sea was wrought in order that Israel might escape from Egypt, the river, to enable them to approach and conquer the Canaanites. Now, can you picture them trying to conquer the Canaanites from the other side of the river? No. The victory, though, at the sea, remember what happened when Israel got across there at the sea? Here comes the Egyptians. What happened? And the walls came tumbling down, just like Jericho. The walls of water, poosh, came tumbling down. All right? So that enabled them, this crossing of the river enabled them to go, approach, and begin the conquering of the Canaanites. All right? Third, the sea, the Lord caused it to go back by a strong east wind. Write this note down, Exodus 14:21. Exodus 14:21. Right? Strong east wind. But with the river, there were no means like that deployed. And why did God do it like that? Why do you think God did that like that? He could have done it exactly the same, but he chose not to. He's in control, isn't he? All right? Now, at the Red Sea, he blowed it dry all night with a strong east wind, it says. Here, he doesn't do that. He does part the water, and he does stop the water in a unique style. It stops and just starts building up and up and up like a big pile of water. And they go across on dry ground. There wasn't no wind blowing, nothing like that. And you know in a river it's going to be muddy, isn't it? Okay? The rivers are always muddy when you get out in them. So here now they're going across on dry ground. So there's a distinct difference there of how God can do and demonstrate. He can do as he pleases. He can use special things in special ways at different times and different ways. It's his choice to demonstrate. It shows his sovereignty, which shows his ability to control nature. You stop and think about it. How many of you can stop a river from flowing just by saying stop? Nobody can, right? It's not natural for us to be able to do that. It's supernatural. And God has that supernatural ability to say, all right, river, stop. And guess what happened? It stopped. Because all of this creation has to obey its creator, God, our sovereign creating God. All right, the sea miracle was performed at night. Remember, the river was, or the sea was blowed dry overnight. And then they crossed early in the morning. And then as soon as they were about to cross, boom, 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 God lifted up the fire that was keeping them separate from the Pharaoh. And what happened? Just as quick as that fire lifted up, zoom, here comes Pharaoh. All right? Now, Pharaoh didn't have pleasant thoughts about them, did he? What did Pharaoh plan to do? Right. He was going to seek revenge upon them because of all the things that had transpired. He was seeking revenge upon the Israelites. Now, you remember, Pharaoh didn't have nobody to blame but himself. Why did they have to go through all those 10 plagues? Because Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he wouldn't turn them loose. So whose fault is it really? Pharaoh's. And I think that at the end there, most of them were beginning to figure that out. Pharaoh was the problem, not the Israelites. So the sea miracle was performed at night, but the river is in broad daylight. Broad daylight where everybody could see, the whole of Israel could see and watch as God stood the river up in a heap. All right, fifth. At the sea, multitudes were slain, for the Lord closed the water upon the Egyptians. Here's another footnote. Exodus 14:28. Exodus 14:28. And you can picture this. Here now they're in hot pursuit. We call that hot pursuit. The chariots, remember, God was already plucking on the wheels of their chariots and they were falling off and they were having a difficult time anyway. And now they're having a difficult time out in the middle of this crossing. And God says, whoosh. And what did they see? Every one of them that entered into that place, what happened to them? They drowned. They washed out to the seashores. Right? So every one of those Egyptians, not one of them was left. And then here crossing the river, not a single soul was lost. Not a single soul drowned. Not a single person drowned. They went across on dry ground with no other event other than the miracle of the water and the dry ground. All right? So the river was not a single soul was perishing. All right? Sixth. Had to write all these down so I wouldn't forget them. The sea was wrought for a people who just previously had been full of unbelief and murmuring unto Moses. Remember, they were murmuring against Moses when they got there. And you can look it up in Exodus 14:11. Now you can mark that down because every time Moses turned around, what were the people doing? Boy, ain't that like us? Every time something don't go our way, what do we start doing? We get like that old bulldog. We start grumbling, we start growling, we start murmuring, we start complaining when it doesn't go our way. My, how God puts up with us, huh? But it says that they had just been complaining about how Moses had brought them out in the wilderness to die. And now here they are, trapped, apparently, between the Pharaoh army and the Red Sea. Now I can imagine feeling a little bit scared. Here comes Pharaoh, and this is one of the strongest armies at the time, one of the most skilled armies. The Egyptians were very strong, very skillful with their chariots, and had they been able to get to them, they would have mowed them down with that chariots, and they would have been not much left of them. But God didn't allow that, did he? Said that when the chariots came in, they got every one of them wiped out and drowned. So here they were in unbelief and murmuring against Moses, and now God demonstrates to them He has the ability to do anything it takes to protect His people. The river was to a people who were believing and obedient. All right? This generation, this new generation, were believing Joshua and were obedient to Joshua and to the commands that the Lord had given him. They said, whatever you say, we're going to go along with it. Remember that phrase over there? Look at chapter 2, verse 24. And they said unto Joshua, truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. That's the two spies, remember? They said, God's taking over this trip, and God's blessing us, and God's put a fear into the hearts of the Canaanites. So now the river, these people are different this time. They've been out in the desert for 40 years, and none save the two are left from that whole generation that escaped. None but two, Joshua and Caleb. The rest are the next generation. And they're obeying. They're believing. They're coming up to the river, and they said, hey, we're going to cross. Now, you don't hear them questioning how they're going to get across. You don't hear them say, oh, that's impossible. Now, most of us had looked at an overflowing river and say, I ain't crossing that. Ain't no way. I can't do that. Well, that's right. They couldn't do it. But they were trusting in somebody that could do it. They were trusting in that sovereign God that has control over everything. Just like Jesus walking on water. He had control. Just like Jesus rebuking that storm and everything went calm. Jesus could control nature, and that's a clear demonstration of His divine authority. By Him being able to control nature itself shows He is God, because it had to obey Him when He spoke, and did. And here now we see the same unique setup where they're getting ready to cross, and not one of them backed off and said, I ain't going. No way, no how. That's what most of us would have said. I ain't going. You can't make me go across that river like that. Well, they didn't have to go across that river like that. Remember? Here they now, the priests have gone in with the ark, and boom, the water stops. Boom, the land is dry that they're going to cross. Boom, they're across. All right? But now remember up there in chapter 3, it said, verse 12, there's something unique here. Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe. All right? So there's a reason why that's going to take place, and we don't find that out until chapter 4, what the reason is. But these people were obedient, and they were believing and trusting in God to make a way for them to go into the land, and then to begin conquering, starting at Jericho. Remember, we know what happened at Jericho, don't we? What happened at Jericho? The walls fell. All except for that one little place. Remember that one little place with the scarlet thread hanging out the window? It remained there. That was the house of Rahab. Remember that? Her house was saved. Her house was protected. Her house had a guarantee on it. No harm would come to her and the occupants of that house. No matter who was in there, they were protected by God's grace. All right? 8th, at the Red Sea, the waters were divided. Chapter 14, verse 21. At the river, the water stood up upon a heap. There's no division. There's just a stoppage. All right? Joshua 3:13 says, and it shall come to pass as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that hear the ark of the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon an heap. All right? So Joshua has warned them, this is what's going to happen. God's going to take us across. As quick as those priests' feet hit that water, boom, the water's going to stop flowing, The land's going to be dry that we go across, and 12 men got a job to do, and God's not giving us what they're going to do. There's a reason for it, as a memorial. There's a reason for it. So you can read ahead in chapter 4 and find out what it is. Okay, so the river was to these people that believed an opportunity to fulfill God's promise and God's covenant to Abraham, and they knew that God was with them because of everything that he'd done so far and everything that he was about to do. Now remember, those that had seen the Red Sea crossing are all dead. These folks didn't see the Red Sea crossing, did they? No. They were newborns. They were new. And they've been wandering out in the desert for 40 years. Remember, in the wilderness for 40 years. So this generation has not seen the miracles of God like that. Now they're getting ready to see their first genuine, large-scale miracle that they're about to witness, and that's going to be the crossing of the Jordan into the Promised Land. All right? So at the Red Sea, the waters were divided, and at the river, the water stood upon a heap. Ninth, in the sea, the believer's judicial death unto sin was typified. In the river, the believer's oneness in Christ, in his resurrection, to be followed with a practical entrance into his inheritance. Now think about this. Israel is crossing in to the Promised Land. That is a type or a picture of the saints. When we get saved, when we cross over Jordan, that river of death, what happens to us? What do we go into? We call it the Promised Land. Why? Right. It was promised to Abraham. Israel was promised to Abraham, but we are promised a spiritual dwelling place as well, and that's New Jerusalem. I remember that. So here's a type that has occurred. Here's a picture of us walking into that promised land. And that promised land is that land of the New Jerusalem that comes down and sets upon a new earth and a new heaven. You think about that. Okay, so there's an interesting parallel there that you can study out. All right? The Red Sea, the enemies at the Red Sea, we see the response of the enemies of the Red Sea. I want to read this one to you at Exodus 15:9. Let me read that one. Exodus 15:9. What was Pharaoh going to do to Israel when he caught up to him? He wasn't going to play patty cakes with them. Exactly. He wasn't going to play politics or mince words. He's going to try to chop them in two. Exodus 15:9. The enemy said, this is the Egyptians, I will pursue. I will overtake. I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword. My hand shall destroy them. I want you to see all those I wills. Sound familiar? Isaiah 14, you can read about the devil, what happened to him. Same type of attitude. I'm going to take over. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be God. You see, that's the same attitude that Pharaoh has. I'm going to do what I want to do, and nobody can stop me. Well, he had another thing coming, didn't he? He got stopped. And now, here comes, over crossing the Jordan, you say here that at the river crossing, you have nothing but believers, and the believers are crossing over. And we'll find, let's go back to Joshua now and go to chapter 5 at verse 1. Look what the result of this crossing, 5:1. And it came to pass when all the kings of the Amorites, which were on the side of Jordan westward, and all the kings of the Canaanites, which were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of Jordan from before the children of Israel, until we were passed over, that their heart, what? Their heart melted, neither was their spirit in them any more, because of the children of Israel. Who's inflicted that fear on their hearts? God. By doing this simple, it wasn't a complicated miracle. It was very simple. He stopped the water. He set them across on dry ground. Now that couldn't have been done normally. Physically, if Israel had tried to do that without God's help, they'd have drowned in that river. But now, because they did and were obedient to God, faithfully followed after God, and did what God told them to do, now they're going to cross and they're going in and they're going to start taking care of business. How much better is it to fight against an enemy that it is afraid, rather than an enemy that's emboldened and courageous and all that? How much harder is it? It's easy when they're fearful, isn't it? Why? They ain't got no stomach for the fight. They're afraid to fight. They know they're going to lose. But now if they're emboldened and say, hey, we're going to take care of business, we're going to kill every one of them, they're going to fight to the death, right? But in this case, not so. It said they're afraid. Okay? They're afraid. In response to the Red Sea crossing, Pharaoh says, I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to kill them all. But here now in the Jordan, the opposite is happening. Everybody's afraid now of Israel. Okay? Everybody's afraid of Israel, and they don't have to worry about anybody pursuing them anymore. All right? Next, after the sea crossing, Israel saw their enemies dead upon the shores. Exodus 14:31. At the river, all they saw to memorialize this place was what? Right, them rocks that we haven't seen yet, being picked up out of the riverbed and carried to a place that was to mark that crossing. And that crossing's supposed to still be marked. I have never seen the stones, but it's supposed to still be there where they crossed. All right? And that was to memorialize the event. But think about this. Here's dead bodies floating up on the seashore, and it's recorded in an independent, non-biblical records that say that they witnessed Egyptian soldiers floating all up and down that seashore in different places. There's a historical notes about how that happened, and that they saw them floating all over the place, and they were scared. They were afraid because something terrible had happened, and sure enough, it had happened to those Egyptians. And God got a testimony about that out of these men that were trying to kill his people. All right? So these men, though, here crossing the Jordan, as soon as they cross, the fear of God now is in these people, these kings and the enemies that they're to face. All right? So Israel saw their enemies dead upon the shore, and here now what they're going to see is a memorial to memorialize the event that had just taken place. They themselves were personally witnessing this miracle occur. All right, they hadn't seen one like that other than the manna that they got fed with and the water that took care of them, and the clothes and their shoes on their feet hadn't worn out. They got to see that. But the big miracle of crossing now is part of their history, and they are told to memorialize this by taking 12 stones, one from each tribe, and setting up a cairn or an Ebenezer. Anybody know what an Ebenezer is? Besides Ebenezer Scrooge? That's the name of a stone pile. That's what it's called, as a witness or a testimony. Okay? It's an Ebenezer. All right? So they get to see that rather than dead bodies floating around. So now we see that in here, between these two, there are a lot of parallels, as it were, between the Red Sea crossing and the Jordan River crossing. And God uses a number 2. What's the number 2 represent in numerology? Remember? Number 2. Right? Write this down somewhere in the leaf of your Bible. The number 2 represents a witness. It's the number of witnesses. Okay? The number of witnesses. The number of witnesses. Right? Remember what Jesus said, out of the mouth of 2, a thing shall be what? Established. All right? That's number 2, is a witness. So here now is the Red Sea crossing and the Jordan River crossing. These two are a witness of God's ability to bring his people through the desert, through the wilderness, even though all those others were doubting, all the murmurs and complaining are dead in the wilderness, he still brings these people across and into the promised land as a witness to the ability and the testimony of God. You think about that, how God established a witness with these two miracles that nobody else could do. You think about how long would it have took them to build a bridge across this place? It would have been impossible, especially in flood stage, to build a bridge. But God did it in one swoop. He did it overnight at the sea, and then during broad daylight. He didn't have to blow the wind. He just dried it up as it said stop. It stopped. Boom. It was dry. Their feet rested on dry ground, it says there in the River Jordan. So now in chapter 4, we'll look at that next time, Lord willing. Chapter 4, we're going to see what those 12 men are. And we see here in verse 1 in chapter 4, we see God telling Joshua something. All right? He's going to tell him what those 12 men are supposed to do. And God wants to memorialize this event so that all of Israel can look back to this time and say, well, God was leading us. God can lead us, can make us victorious. God can help us to occupy our land and to be blessed as we do so. To be watched over, to be protected, and to have God fighting your battles is a great thing to think about. How God can defend you when nobody else can. And God can certainly do what it takes to get the job done. Think about that. All right, we'll stop there. Let's all stand. We'll close with a word of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Brother Doug.